Welcome to the Movement Made Better podcast. On today's episode, we have a friend of ours, Tony Ambler, Wright. So turn it over to you, Tony, and introduce yourself to the listeners, please.
What's up, fellas? Thanks so much for having me on. It's good to finally get this scheduled. I think this makes the third attempt at this. So, as they say, third time's a charm. But Dennis, Neil, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really been looking forward to getting on and rapping with you guys for a bit. So yeah, my name is Tony Ambler, Wright, industry veteran, going on 22 years now in fitness and performance industry. Been fortunate enough to work in a variety of different environments and in a variety of different capacities, which has been really fun, really exciting, and been good to keep things fresh and keep me learning and evolving as a professional and as a person. So, hopefully we can share some of our collective experiences today. Looking forward to talking about stick mobility, as well as, what I do now currently for work, which is working for the National Academy of Sports Medicine as a content strategist and Master Instructor. Been with them full time now, I guess, since August or September. Gosh, the months are just running together. So that's been really fun. Being in that position, I think, just helped catalyze, us coming together on your show. And then I know we're going to return the favor and I get to have you guys on one of our shows, which will be great. Yeah, that's a little bit about me, short and sweet. If there's anything else you want to know, I'll be happy to hear.
So where'd you get your start though? So where's your very first starting position?
Yeah, so 20 plus years in the industry, got into it at 24-hour fitness, like many trainers. I don't know now. Yeah. Yep. staring at one right here, like looking in the mirror. But, good friend of ours, Matt Schmelka, that's where he and I met, was at 24-hour fitness in Citrus Heights, California, just outside Sacramento, which interestingly enough was the second ever 24-hour fitness location, which is kind of interesting, Bay Area company, but the second location ever was this small suburb of Sacramento. But yeah, got my start in 99 at 24-hour fitness. I was a competitive athlete in high school, played a variety of different sports, but ultimately ended on endurance sports. So I ran track, cross country, got into mountain biking. At the time wasn't as hugely popular as it is now. It's just starting to get more popular. And so always had an interest in that. And throughout my athletic career, got injured. And through rehab and dealing with those injuries, I just gained an interest in the body, how it works, how to make it stronger, more resilient, and what to do to help maximize performance. And so I knew in high school that I wanted to do something related to exercise science. So the original thought was to go into physical therapy. At the time, it was super competitive. Not that it isn't still really competitive, but back in the late 90s, everything was master's degree. So you'd get your undergrad in pre-physical therapy, and then there might be 30 people accepted to the PT program. And so super competitive, quickly realized that I probably wouldn't make it is just based on my study habits, based on the type of student that I was in college. So I changed my major a couple times, ended up going back to exercise science, just couldn't get away from it. A buddy I worked with, he and I used to work out and train together, and he had gotten his degree in exercise science from Chico State and ended up getting a job at 24-hour fitness. And, when we'd train and work out together, he'd tell me how things were going, and it just seemed like such a fun thing. And I was like, this is what I'm meant to do. Switch majors back to exercise science, asked him if he could try and hook me up with an interview at 24-hour. And he did. And I was fortunate enough to get hired on. So got my degree in exercise science, worked at the 24-hour fitness location for 7 years. And during that time, it was such a great time in the industry, thinking back on it, look at it with a bit of nostalgia, kind of the advent of functional training, if you will, a lot of stuff that we kind of take for granted now was just starting or becoming more prevalent, more popular in the clubs back then. Kettlebells, like I said, functional training, foam rolling or soft tissue work. Now foam rollers are everywhere, but you very rarely see them in clubs back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so anyway, it was a fun time to be in the industry. And a large part of what helped shape me as a professional was the NASM education. And so I got certified through a few different organizations when I started up. Obviously, 24-hour fitness had their own in-house cert. And, there was an NASM slant to that, which, was quite a bit different then than it is now. Got certified through ISSA and then through a more formal NASM CPT program. And at that time, they had just started to transition to the OPT model, or optimum performance training model, and using that as the foundation for their personal trainer curriculum and education. And it made sense to me. Something just clicked, and I was like, this makes a ton of sense. Movement is the foundation for everything we do as fitness professionals. And so if your clients aren't moving optimally, or if you're not working towards, enhancing or improving their movement while they're trying to achieve their other goals, then we're likely going to miss the mark, or we're not going to enable them to achieve their full potential. And so just that whole premise, with movement being the cornerstone and the foundation for a training program, just resonated, made a lot of sense to me. And so I implemented the OPT model from then on with all my clients, and had great success. Was able to work with a wide variety, diverse population of clients. At that point, I was like, I'm loving this. I want other trainers to see the benefit and experience the benefit with their clients. And so at that point, I was interested in pursuing an opportunity to work for NASM as part of their education team. So it took me a few years, but in 2005, I was hired on as one of their master instructors, assisting with content development, and really the primary job of going and teaching our live workshops. So really putting what's in the courses, in the textbooks, in the videos, really bringing that to life and putting it into practice. That was our primary focus as the workshop instructors. Anyway, met my wife, Wendy Batts. She's also a master instructor, now a regional master instructor for NASM. And through our relationship, that took me from Cali to Phoenix, Arizona. Once in Phoenix, I worked for Lifetime Fitness as a personal trainer and regional education specialist, or regional training specialist for them, where I helped onboard and train all of the new hire PTs, personal trainers in the West region at the time. So it was Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. The nice thing about being in Phoenix was NASM is headquartered there, and I was fortunate enough to be able to work a little more closely with Dr. Mike Clark, who created the NASM OPT model and was the president and CEO of NASM at the time. Through that, was afforded some opportunities working with professional athletes. So, back in the early to mid 2000s, the Phoenix Suns were kind of lauded as having the premier sports medicine staff in not just the NBA, but all professional sports. When you looked at, man games missed to injury, being able to revitalize, players who may have been considered past their prime, being able to revitalize them just by, focusing on getting them to move right and train properly. And so Dr. Clark was the team physical therapist for the Phoenix Suns. And as players would come through Phoenix, if they got traded or transitioned to other teams, many of them still had off-season homes there. And so when they'd come home for the off-season, they'd ask for recommendations or referrals for people to train with who, followed a similar approach to what they had experienced when they were with the Suns. And so that led me to some opportunities working with some NBA guys in the off-season, and being able to implement fully integrated, kind of comprehensive approach to programming, from corrective exercise, if you will, all the way through stabilization, strength, and power, to be able to optimize and prepare them for the demands of the upcoming season. So that was kind of my first taste and experience working with professional athletes, and found I really enjoyed it and wanted to do more of it. And so after a few years, I guess 5 years at Lifetime, Dr. Clark started another company. So NASM went through an acquisition, and as part of that acquisition, he stayed on for a time, but then he started another business that my wife, Wendy, worked for. And that business was acquired by a company that was based here in Atlanta, which is where we live now. We live just north of Atlanta in Roswell, but that brought us to the East Coast. During that transition, it was 2011, NBA lockout season. And so while Wendy had a job opportunity waiting for her here in Atlanta, I hadn't really lined anything up yet. I was actually going to stay behind because we were trying to sell our house in Phoenix, and I was trying to make sure all my clients were taken care of, and that I was leaving things the right way at Lifetime. Anyway, it was a lockout. And prior to leaving Phoenix, I had an opportunity to work with an NBA player who was still with Phoenix at the time. And I had a colleague of mine who was working with another player who was with Phoenix and then had been traded to New York to the Knicks the previous year, or not traded, he was signed rather by the Knicks. Anyway, he had an opportunity to travel and work with professional polo player of all things, world champion polo player. It was just something that he couldn't pass up, and so his client needed somebody to work with him full time, and I needed something to do. So it kind of worked out. One thing, I gotten a license to practice manual therapy, massage therapy, and so that was another skill set that we kind of added, and that my buddy and colleague Trevor was doing was, integrated manual therapy, corrective exercise, and then performance training. So essentially very similar to what these guys were getting when they were with the team, the Suns. And that's the system that Dr. Clark had implemented there. And we were fortunate enough to get mentored by him. Anyway, Trev went to go work with his polo player client. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work with his client in the NBA who was playing for the Knicks at the time. And so during the lockout, he was training out of Florida, which is where his home was and where he was living. And so my wife went to Atlanta and then I went to Florida. And really the plan was to be there as long as we needed to be. Wasn't sure how long the lockout was going to last. And then about 4 weeks into my time there in Florida, the lockout ended and they had to report to training camp. And so my client asked if I'd be willing to go up to New York and continue to work with him. I said, yeah, that'd be great. And we arranged it so that I was integrated with the team and was able to continue to work with him and travel with the team and was kind of fully integrated into the team environment, which isn't all that common. So I was really, really lucky to have been able to do that, and really, really fortunate that the Knicks were open enough to allowing me to do that and, kind of be a part of that inner circle. It wasn't easy. Certainly never is when you have somebody from the outside coming in, kind of being forced in, essentially. But they were really great to me, and it was a good experience. And so I was up in New York for a bit, and then my time with the Knicks came to an end, and that led me to an opportunity to do the same thing with a very high-profile Yankee. So I stayed in New York. I was basically in New York for almost 3 years. During that 2011, 2012 year, I think I was came home to Atlanta like 25 days. All the other time I was either in New York or on the road traveling and working with clients. And so that was kind of from fitness into working with elite athletes and performance. And then right around 2013, Dr. Clark started another business called Fusionetics, which essentially was a software as a service business that integrated assessment technology and programming technology into a platform that could be licensed to teams, organizations, sports medicine facilities, colleges and universities, and so forth. And so he asked if me and my buddy Trevor wanted to be a part of that business, and we thought it would be a great thing to do. And so the clients that we were seeing at the time, we kind of rolled into Fusionetics. They became Fusionetics clients, and that first year we continued to travel and train and work with them. And then once the software platform was developed, then my roles and responsibilities kind of shifted and transitioned more towards supporting that, whether it was training and development, helping with account implementation. If we did work with any teams or organizations, we would certainly go out and do on-site visits, and we'd still work with athletes if they requested it, but it was really more about trying to get that software and system implemented with our different clients and customers. And so we had a facility here in the North Atlanta area, and we continued to see clients. So still got my hands dirty a little bit, training and doing therapy, and was with Fusionetics, I guess, until it'll have been a year ago this month. So I was with Fusionetics until last February, and then came on board full time with NASM in August. So
nice.
Never really left fitness. Was still part of the NASM Master Instructor team through all of that, and really blessed to be able to continue to work with that organization and that group of individuals and colleagues there. And so really happy where I'm at now, and back more in the definitely more in the fitness focused arena, less so with athletes and the account support, software support type stuff.
How much training are you actually doing now? I mean, it sounds like you've transitioned to more kind of behind the screen type stuff.
There was that period of time between last, I guess, March and August where I really wasn't doing anything full time. And so I was like, what the heck am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life? Right after my time ended at Fusionetics. COVID hit full bore, and the world as we know it kind of changed. And after a few months, started getting some texts and calls from former clients like, "Hey, can you see me?" They were still active, still training, but they're like, "Yeah, my body's beat up. I need some therapy. I need some training. Are you seeing anybody?" And so I started seeing clients again out of our home office. That led to some referrals, and so I actually built up a pretty significant training schedule between, I'd say, May, when the restrictions were kind of lifted here in Georgia, and August. And so got into training quite a bit actually. And then, since then, and since coming on full time at NASM, I haven't been able to do that as much. Although if it's early in the morning or sometimes on weekends, we'll still have clients come to the house, and I'll still continue to work with them. Also leveraging, NASM has a training app, and so I can set them up on programs that they can access through the application. And so I am still getting a bit of training, certainly not as much as it was 6 months ago. I think if you're working in content development, education, instruction like we do, you have to still continue to practice your craft and develop your skills. And I've certainly grown as a practitioner, as a trainer over the last 6 months, and I want to continue to do so. And so I just think that in order to be an effective educator and content creator, you need to be actually doing it too. So so it's been fun. Still training a little bit. It's not, certainly not full time, but it's enough to keep me sharp, or sharp as I ever was, I guess. But so it's been fun. But the great thing too, and I love about you guys and Stick Mobility and your system, is that it just fits in seamlessly with how I approach training and working with my clients. And so I've always, obviously we've known each other for quite a long time, but I've just always felt that there was such alignment and such synergy between Stick Mobility and then the NASM approach to assessment and programming. So it's been fun getting in, using the sticks with clients. I've had quite a few of my clients purchase sticks, and they love it too. So it's been fun. It's been good.
How do you train a polo player? That's interesting, because I'd be like,
Gosh, I should probably introduce you guys to Trevor. He could talk to you more about it. It's interesting. His client at the time, polo was obviously something he was driven and very interested in doing. He actually had two teams. He owned a team that was based here in the States, and he owned one that was based in Europe. Because he was not only an owner of the team, but he also was a player on the team. I guess one of the perks, right? If you own the team, you can play on it. Two have won championships in both of these leagues or associations. I'm not sure what the exact term was, because I never worked with Lyndon much, but world champion polo player, billionaire businessman by day. So some of the companies that he owned or managed, we would all be very familiar with. And so anyway, polo was his passion and his sport, and he developed some hip issues, and ultimately was going to need a hip replacement, and was basically trying to delay that as much as possible. He was also into jiu-jitsu, which, if you think of the positions in jiu-jitsu, sitting on a horse are going to be very similar stress to the hip. And so the original intent and focus was just to keep him healthy enough to make it through the season, so they could, win the championship, and he could get all the accolades and enjoyment from that he could. Quite a bit of his program was very manual therapy focused, just to ensure that, when you have trauma, when you have pain, the body's response to that is going to be to try to protect the area. And so you're going to see range of motion loss. If there are any, bony or structural changes to the hip, that can limit range of motion. And so, you're just working against all those things. And so it's, like I said, ultimately he's going to have procedure done, but it was just, whatever he could do to delay that. And so a lot of it was just very simple, low intensity, low complexity training and exercise. I mean, if you just think, so a lot of it was therapy on the table. And then I know we'll probably get into this, because we got into it the first time we tried to record this, but it's one thing to develop range of motion or achieve improved range of motion, but then you have to be able to control that new range. And the term would be mobility, I guess, is kind of, I'd say that's probably the delineation for most people between flexibility and mobility. So, flexibility is your capacity or is the extensibility of the tissues. It gives you kind of the capacity to move through a particular range of motion. Mobility is your ability to, express that and use it to its fullest potential and control it. And so with Trevor, and what we would do on the manual therapy side is we would start. Typically, we start every session with an assessment, and over time, you kind of learn, okay, what are the key areas you need to assess prior to a session, so you're not looking at everything, kind of narrow down your focus. But basically, you'd look at key things like ankle dorsiflexion, knee extension, hip internal, external rotation, hip extension, and any other areas that you think were relevant, hip abduction. And we would use a goniometer, which are you guys familiar with that? Or for the listeners who might not be, it's basically a protractor for your joints. It measures joint angles, and so we would measure or assess using a goniometer, and based on the numbers that day, that would help guide the therapy that we would do. Some days be better than others, and therefore you would do less, or you might have to do something different. And so once they got that range of motion back with the therapy, then they would do corrective exercise, isolated movement patterns for the muscles around the targeted joint. So hip internal rotation, would be a key measurement there that we would work on. And so once you achieve that improved hip internal, how do you reinforce that? Well, it depends on some of the other stuff that's going on. One side, if you look at the orientation of the pelvis, if one side of the pelvis is anteriorly rotated, the other side then is relatively posteriorly rotated. And so they could both sides could have limited internal rotation, but they would be caused by two different things, right? The side that's anteriorly rotated might be more adductor, TFL, glute minimus restriction, just due to compression of the hip. And then on the posteriorly rotated side, you might be looking more at piriformis, biceps femoris, adductor magnus. And so all that would kind of guide what you did from a therapy flexibility standpoint. And then to reinforce that new range, you would want to activate the opposing muscles to the ones you just did the therapy and stretching or flexibility work on to, reinforce that new range, help reestablish some neuromuscular control. And then, mobility is one thing when you're laying down on a table. It's another thing to use it in a functional position. Then you would, we'd follow that up with some quote unquote functional patterns that would be relevant to whatever he was doing that day in a training session or whatever he needed to do to get ready to ride. And so it was really basic early on for Lyndon. And then, as those things improved, then, his training became more intense and became focused more on developing strength and power and some of the other things you would need. But initially it was just, can you sustain riding through a match and recover from that appropriately without getting beat up too badly. But then when you think about, the other, just riding in general, equestrian sports are pretty big here in Georgia around me.
Okay.
If you just look at the demand on core stability, not having a firm foundation from which to create that stability, then you have to kind of get creative with, how you train and improve those things. But, a lot of tight adductors, a lot of tight hip rotators. And so you need to work on, postural endurance, core endurance, range of motion and in the hips, and then focusing on all the muscles that tend to become, let's say down regulated or not used as much. You want to make sure you're addressing those in the training program just to offset all the time spent riding and training. But depending on the type of sport or event that rider does, that would also influence what you do from a training perspective. If you're doing agility stuff, jumping stuff with the horse, you're dealing with a very large animal and a lot of forces being imparted on the body. Is you have to guide the horse to do what it needs to do. So
yeah, I think a lot of people have this misconception that they're sitting in the saddle, and most of the time they're actually hovering above the saddle. So you think about the endurance of the hip tissues that you need.
Yeah, exactly. And then you think the calf musculature, all of that as you're holding those positions isometrically and manipulating yourself around the horse and trying to manipulate the horse. Yeah, the endurance is needed is crazy.
Well, polo riders can't be very big, right?
No.
Typically.
Yeah, they're not sitting at 250.
No.
Because the horse would be like, get the hell off.
So you imagine too, just their hip structure is going to be a little bit smaller and they got to be able to, wrap their legs around the horse. So there's going to be more stress that way too.
Exactly.
Well, you also have because when I rode horses growing up on the ranch, some of the guys were bow-legged. Mm-hmm. So, you have that you saw adaptation taking place structurally there. But yeah, what a dynamic difference between training a basketball player and training a polo player, just from
a performance and capacity perspective, very, very different. But, the interesting thing is how you approach trying to optimize them to be able to perform and do what they need to do is very similar. And so that's where, I love that you guys have a system. That's where, at NASM, we have a system. So something that Dr. Clark was very big on was systems. And so when you systematize something, that allows you to get reproducible results. And it provides you a form of checks and balances. Because if you continue to do the same thing repeatedly, then if something doesn't work or if the outcomes aren't what you expect, then it makes it easier to kind of retrace, where you may need to modify or adjust things. And so, it didn't matter whether, whether Trevor was working with him or he was working with, he's worked with an unbelievable roster of clients. Yeah, whether it was gold medal sprinter, famous basketball players, polo players, baseball athletes, whoever it was that we're working with, we would start every session the same way. All right, let's see what your numbers are. Let's see what we need to focus on and work and target today to get you moving right. And then from there, we would get into, whatever the training program called for. And obviously that would be more specific to the athlete and what their needs are.
Well, I know when you were working with our buddy Matt at 24 Hour Fitness, he said that he turned his legs into springs using the OPT model.
Yeah. Well, obviously he's a pretty good athlete to begin with. So there may have just been some detraining going on with him for a while, right? So once he just started working out consistently again, probably got his bounce back. But
because he played wide receiver in high school too, besides basketball, right? Yeah,
he did. Yeah. So he was a great athlete, phenomenal athlete. Yeah, specific to the OPT model, I guess we've been talking about it, but don't know how much people know specifically what it is. And the whole premise of the OPT or optimum performance training model, as I mentioned earlier, it's the foundation is human movement. And so you want to optimize a human movement system to be able to allow it to express its full potential. And so, we know just based on the evidence that individuals who have certain movement tendencies, they have to work harder when they play a particular sport or perform a particular activity. They may be at greater risk for certain non-contact injuries if they display certain movement tendencies or lack certain ranges of motion in different joints and in different positions. And some interesting new research shows too that poor movers overall show greater systemic stress. So when you look at like cortisol levels, for example, individuals who have poor movement tendencies have higher circulating cortisol. And so just obviously it kind of makes sense, if you're moving and your joints aren't optimized to move through their full range of motion, you've got certain muscle imbalances where, you've kind of adapted to whatever it is you do day to day. If you go to do something that isn't aligned with that, well, that's going to create some stress. And that's not to say that, not all stress is bad, right? That's how you get better and how you improve. But that's the kind of the underlying tenet of the OPT model is you got to try and focus on getting your clients to move well and move better before you are able to maximize strength, speed, agility, power, all of the qualities that we look to improve with our clients and athletes. And it's not unlike many of the other systems that are out there. And so we've talked about this before too, is that a lot of it's just semantics. But if there's been an ever increasing focus on movement and recovery and mobility, which is great. And there are a lot of different camps and different organizations and companies that focus on that. And if you strip it all back, we're probably saying 90% of the same stuff, might be using different terms, might be framing it a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, we're focused on the same things. And so that's what I hope to, bring more light to, at least in my role now at NASM is, and working with partners like you and others, is to show the similarities and in perspective. I think NASM for a long time has gotten maybe somewhat of a bad rap as being more of an exclusive type training system. where, very rigid. This is the only way to do things. And, we provide a system because a lot of professionals, a lot of trainers need that. They don't know what to do. And so it's basically a blueprint. It's a recipe, but like any recipe, you can make it your own too. And so, the OPT model is very inclusive. And again, that's why I love what you guys do, because it aligns so well with our approach to training and programming. Movement first, and then, when you look at the different qualities and adaptations that you can achieve from a training program, the OPT model consists of, 6 phases of training. The first phase is really more of a muscular endurance phase. We call it stabilization endurance, where essentially the underlying focus is on improving neuromuscular control, improving movement quality in all 3 planes of motion, and typically focusing more on developing more resilient and more robust tissue health, where, if you look at some of the variables for that first phase, higher repetition range, obviously for the endurance piece, and slower tempos with an emphasis on eccentric and isometric muscle action, which, Dennis, we talked about this last time, is that, that's an often overlooked component of people's training, is the speed at which they move. And, especially if you're dealing with early or people new to a fitness program, the non-contractile tissues are the ones that take the longest to adapt to a training program. And so when increase the intensity or volume of a program too much too soon for somebody's capacity at that time, that's when you run into increased tendon stress. You start, running into those soft tissue injuries, or, soft tissue issues that likely could have been mitigated or minimized if things had been progressed properly. And so that's the focus of that first phase. Again, I think a lot of it is how, we positioned it too. I think people got the idea, or maybe the misperception or misconception, that it's all about training on unstable surfaces and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, which is a method of progression in that phase. But stabilization is dictated by the person's ability, whoever it is that you're working with. It's dictated by their ability to maintain proper form and alignment, execution of the pattern that you're having them perform. And so if I was working with my mother, for example, who's not very, conditioned physically, I could put her in a, seated machine, and that might be her limit of stability at that point in time, is just being able to maintain good posture and alignment in that machine and working through whatever pattern it is. Let's say it's a rowing pattern at the tempo that I'd like, for the repetition range that I'd like. And then from there, if we wanted to, instead of just adding more load, we could enhance the stability demand. So maybe we, change the pulling pattern from a bilateral pattern to an alternating arm pattern, where now you have to deal with some different stresses through the core and the trunk and through the scapula and shoulder. Maybe then you go to a reciprocating pattern, and then you go to a single arm pattern, and then a single arm pattern with rotation. So all of those change especially you start loading unilaterally, changes the stability demand of an exercise, even though I'm still on a machine. And so just looking at it from that perspective, not looking at it as, what's the craziest unstable surface I could have my client work on, but just saying, look, how can I make something incrementally more challenging so that I get the response that I'm looking for, which ultimately is endurance, enhanced eccentric and isometric control, and proper movement patterns. It's a hard phase. It's a pain in the ass. People don't like doing it because it's hard. And so I think that's another reason why, that may not be a focus of certain individuals training. But, bringing it back to Matt, kind of full circle, when I was working with him while we were training at the gym, we started in phase 1 of the OPT model. And phase 1 doesn't mean it's remedial. It doesn't mean you suck. It just means, look, okay, based on how you've been training to this point, based on, what our assessment results show us, this would be a great place to start. And, ultimately your ability to develop and express strength and power is going to be limited by your ability to stabilize and move properly. And I think that's another misconception, is that term stability. stability doesn't always mean lack of movement. Stability means you're able to keep things in the right place while you're moving. Mm-hmm. And so, that's another key focus of that phase. And so with Matt, he had a few different goals. He wanted to put on some lean body mass, and he wanted to get back into hooping and, being able to dunk and all that stuff. And so we set him up on a 3-day-a-week total body, stabilization endurance program. Yeah, it worked really well for him, but focusing on, like I said, eccentric, isometric control, higher repetition range, you're getting endurance in those stabilizing muscles. You're able to maintain proper movement for, longer durations. And, he put on quite a bit of size too. I mean, we made some adjustments to his nutrition and caloric intake, but I think he went from like 176 pounds to 192 in a little over 4 weeks. He was able to,
holy shit,
massive. Yeah. No increase in body fat percentage.
One pizza a night.
Yeah. A lot of what at the time, a lot of Cyto gainer.
Cyto gainer.
Yeah. Bringing it back.
Cause Matt's about what, 6'2"?
6'1",
6'1", 6'2". Yeah.
Yeah. He was a lean, mean machine at 176, and then got him up to 192 and in short order. But still, not only with the additional weight and no increase in body fat percentage, but that's when he could dunk. So he got his springs back with, still putting on 16 pounds. He was able to drop step and dunk, which he wasn't doing at 176 pounds. And so, nice. The whole thing, and we've seen this over and over again too, where, in athletes where strength testing is important and power testing is important, by getting them moving better, you're basically taking the parking brake off and allowing their neuromuscular system to perform to the level that it's capable of. And so, that's what happened with Matt. Obviously, you get things firing and moving properly, and, the neuromuscular system's like, oh, okay, I'm moving pretty well. Things are working. Let's just, let's take the shackles off, and we can recruit all these big muscles like we know we're capable of.
And that eccentric iso combo, you can do a 4-2-1 count on each rep, right?
Yeah. So that was kind of the original tempo scheme. And so it'd be 4-second eccentric, 2-second iso, and then 1-second concentric. So NASM, we've always used kind of a three values for the tempo. You can obviously add a fourth value there for the other isometric, if you wanted to add another isometric piece in there. So, and then you could choose what aspect of the exercise or lift you incorporate that isometric, right? Because it's one thing, just using a push-up as an example, it's one thing to do the isometric in the eccentric loaded position at the bottom versus at the top. And so you could have some fun and add some variability that way too, depending on what your client wants to achieve.
Because most people are just used to doing an entire rep takes them about 1.5 seconds.
Oh yeah, you're being generous.
Am I being? Yeah, I think I'm being generous. I mean, okay, a second. I mean, literally, boom, boom, and that's it. So you bring that 4-2-1 in. You see people just like, holy shit.
Yeah, no, it's a game changer. And then that's where, when you look at just the volume and the amount of work, when you think about it, we were probably doing, like I said, we were doing 3 total body workouts a week. Three sets of 15 to 20 repetitions. Ultimately, by the time we got to the end of the cycle, and you add up the total time under tension, it's massive, right? Yeah. So you don't need to do a ton of sets.
20 reps is 2 minutes.
Yeah,
basically.
So then it's like, okay, then you can get a little bit creative with your programming. Everybody programs differently, but if you think about a typical person coming into the gym, like, all right, what am I working today? All right, I'm doing some chest. I'm doing some shoulders. They might do 4 different chest exercises, 3 to 4 sets of each. But, let's just keep the math easy. Let's say they're doing 10 reps. That's 10 seconds per set of time under tension, right? With how people typically lift. So what is that? That's 40 seconds of time under tension per exercise. And what's 40 times 4? It's 160 seconds of time under tension for all those exercises that you just did. Mm-hmm. So when you look at just the the cumulative number of reps, they're probably using load that's, heavier than it needs to be. They're not controlling the movement. They're not controlling the load. And so that's going to add some unnecessary, maybe some undesirable stress to the soft tissues. And they're not getting a favorable training response or training adaptation because they're not maximizing that time under tension, which we know is one of the key components to muscular development. That was something that when you look at the recommendations, especially in that initial phase of the OPT model, and even some of the subsequent phases, is like, well, the volume's not that high. Like, well, it doesn't have to be because your tempos are high and you're focusing on that. And then we also know that training frequency is very important. So instead of, let's say, focusing on a body part or a movement pattern once or twice a week, you could focus on the same things 3 days a week. It's like, all right, well, let's say I'm only doing one horizontal pushing exercise on Monday. It's not going to completely destroy me where I can't recover in 2 days if everything's on point. And then I could do a different horizontal pushing pattern, right? So you still get your variety and your variability, but instead of doing it all in one workout, you're doing it over the course of a week. And so it's just a different way to look at programming, but it works really well if you kind of give it the time and attention. I'm not going to say that it deserves, but if you instead of just kind of looking at it and being like, oh, well, this doesn't make sense, or this is lame, I'm not even going to try it. If you take some of the time and actually implement it, it can results that you get.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting conundrum for a lot of coaches. Is they tend to be in one camp or the other, so it's hard for them to kind of say, okay, let me bring a little of this in and combine it with a little of that.
I mean, ultimately, it just comes down to adaptation, and that should drive everything you do in a training session. And I don't think trainers really think about that either. So when you look at periodization and the different outcomes that you get from a training program, most people or most trainers, I don't think, give that enough attention either. And there's a variety of different ways to periodize and plan a program. If I've determined that, okay, my goal is to improve muscular endurance and enhance neuromuscular control, then everything in my program should be focused on accomplishing that. I talked about Trevor before. He's been in a number of situations with clients, and it is challenging, not just for him, but it's challenging for the different teams that he might be dealing with and the professionals on those teams. I mean, it's not easy when you have an outside professional working with one of your athletes. But if you're trying to improve stability and neuromuscular control overall, you're not just going to get that from doing like one or two exercises in a workout. You have to look at, what's going to happen over the course of a cycle, everything, every pattern, every movement that you do. If you're trying to optimize that particular response, should be geared towards that. It's not just doing one exercise on a single leg and saying, yeah, we're doing stability training. That's not necessarily going to cut it. So I think the key is, all right, what outcome are you shooting for? And that outcome is driven by certain variables and stressors, and you need to incorporate that into the program in order to get that result. And so we know when you look at the specific adaptation to impose demands, you've got mechanical specificity, you've got metabolic specificity, neuromuscular specificity. All those are different parameters that you can use to influence the stress that you put on the body and how it responds to that stress. And that's what the OPT model does. It just gives you a blueprint to be able to apply those different types of specificity to the body that you're working with in order to get to whatever goal you want to accomplish, or they want to accomplish, rather, focused on the client. But so that first phase is huge. I don't think people give it enough credit. And then, from there you get into strength endurance, which is kind of a hybrid phase where, you can perform a superset of more traditional strength focused exercise with more of a stabilization focused exercise immediately after. So similar biomechanical pattern and muscles being challenged, but the environment is going to change. And so, an example of that might be, barbell bench press or heavy dumbbell bench press followed by a push-up variation of some sort. The first exercise is going to be done at more of a moderate tempo, still way slower than most people are used to. 2 seconds eccentric, 2 seconds concentric, more of a continuous kind of repeating pattern. And then the second exercise is going to be more stability, that slower eccentric and isometric emphasis, like a 3-2-1. So you're still looking at a ton of time under tension. And then to develop that endurance, your rest periods are going to be a little bit different to stretch things. And then from there, you get into what we'll now call muscular development training, which is, really a versatile phase. You could focus on hypertrophy goals, lean body mass gain, maybe some of your, metabolic, higher intensity styles of training could fit there too. So basically an opportunity for you to mix volume, time under tension, and different rest periods and work to rest ratios to be able to get the body to respond a certain way for the goal of muscular development and work capacity. And then from there, we've got maximum strength. So heavy weight, low reps. There's a ton of different ways you can structure a program to develop max strength. And then from there, we've got 2 power-oriented phases. One is what we just call it power, which is probably more basic than it should be. The original name of the phase was elastic equivalent training, but essentially it's a form of contrast training. So you do heavy compound exercise followed by an explosive exercise using a similar pattern. And so that was, that's the other thing is contrast training, PAP, post-activation potentiation. That's something that's more common now and that people do. But when Dr. Clark first developed the OPT model, back in 99, 2000, like nobody had really heard of it. It was in the research, and there was some good stuff, track and field and working with, Olympic lifters and track and field athletes, but it definitely wasn't mainstream. And so, I think that kind of vision and foresight and, some of that stuff I think is underappreciated when people look at NASM and the OPT model, or, they think about the OPT model. Or, again, many of the things that we know as commonplace now, foam rolling, NASM was the first fitness certification to introduce foam rolling to the gym. I mean, before that, you would only see it in rehab settings typically. So the concept of assessment, looking at movement patterns, focusing on improving range of motion and mobility, and some of the different styles of training that are more popular now. A lot of that was we've been doing for over 20 years. And I don't think people make that connection sometimes. So yeah, it's been fun. And then the final phase is max power training. So that's just, high velocity. You're just trying to, you're trying to peak for a competition or a particular event, maximize performance and power output. There's certain acute variable scheme that you would follow for that. And so those are the different phases of the model, and you can guide somebody through those phases however you like, and whatever based on whatever's appropriate for their goals. And then there's the linear approach to periodization, where you can go from one phase to the next and spend a certain amount of time in each, or you can use more of an undulating or microdosing style, where when your client reaches a particular level, you can have them train in multiple phases over the course of a cycle. And so you may not see maximal development or improvement in any one area, but you might see small changes and improvements in multiple areas. It can work really well for a lot of people.
Would you ever structure a session where you're using multiple phases? So let's just say like taking some of the power stuff, putting that in the beginning of the session. And then for the strength stuff, now we're in the stabilization phase.
Yeah, again, it goes kind of back to the rigidity or the inflexibility of the model. But yes, you can absolutely combine phases. You may have clients where maybe they're more advanced in one aspect of their training than in others, or maybe lower extremity is able to do certain things and the upper extremity is not. So maybe you're training in different phases for different things between the upper and lower body. Or if you look at our programming template, there are different sections within the programming template. And so the first section is really more of a movement preparation section, where you can incorporate your mobility work, whether it's self-myofascial techniques, rolling, percussion, whatever your tool of choice is, followed by some flexibility or stretching techniques. Again, whatever you feel is appropriate. And then you would get into some activation work. So a lot of latitude in terms of how that's interpreted. And then from there, you could get into more of your higher, maybe neural demands or more complex exercises if you need, or skill development work could go there. So yeah, if you're incorporating plyometrics or some elements of power, you could put them there prior to getting into the resistance training portion of the template. But what we try to do is we try to keep, when you look at power training, for example, or plyometric training, there's different styles that you can incorporate within plyometric training. There's more reactive type training. There are elements where you can incorporate maybe more of an emphasis on eccentric control and isometric control. And so, those kind of follow the goal of each of the different phases of the OPT model. And so even though somebody might be in, let's say, phase 1, where the overarching goal is stability and endurance, you could still incorporate plyometric activities in that phase. The focus would just be a little bit different. It wouldn't be on developing maximum elasticity. It might be working to improve eccentric and isometric control while somebody does a particular. So
almost like, jumping as high as you can and then landing and, landing mechanics, controlling, pausing in that squat at the bottom.
Exactly.
Or not a full squat, but
yeah, where you
would jump from. Yeah.
Yeah. Wherever you come down, sticking the landing, landing with control, making sure you're landing on the appropriate part of the foot, making sure everything's in alignment, and then reinforcing that position before, repeating the pattern. And then you can regress that by, jumping up onto a box. You can progress it by jumping down off of a box, right, where the landing forces are going to be magnified, jumping down. You can change planes of motion. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to progress, regress, and vary the exercise stimulus so that your client gets better and has a good experience. You don't have to do the same crap every single time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's maybe a different way of looking at programming, but it's training with intention. Essentially, you're not just going in and working out. You've got a bit of a structure to the program, and you have some intended outcomes that you're working toward achieving. And I don't think trainers do that enough. And I'm generalizing. There's some great trainers who certainly do that, but I'd say the industry as a whole doesn't do a good job of that. Where you're assessing your client, you're identifying their goals, you're developing a program based on those goals, and then you're reevaluating to make sure that you're staying on track and progressing the way that you need to be. And not only is that beneficial for the trainer to figure out if what they're doing is working, but it's also beneficial for the client to know that they're getting better. And there's value in working with the trainer. Like if the trainer never reassesses or never does anything to demonstrate that their client is improving, most clients, they don't always see the new versions of themselves. They kind of tend to see who they were before they started training. And so that reinforcement and, is really important, not only for them, but again, for the trainer to demonstrate their value and that, what they're doing is working. And, it's been a good investment for the person who's working with it.
I think the other thing too is we're always making training kind of the stuff that you wouldn't do on your own. Right. And so our job as coaches is to get them to do stuff that they don't want to do on their own, but then at the same time, be able to give them stuff that's going to be fun. Right. Yep. But then also be able to continue to track all the stuff that they don't want to do, but show them that this is the improvement that you're making, either with load, range of motion increase.
Yeah. Something they can gauge. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Maybe it's an activity at home that they do that's gotten much easier.
Right.
Like, hey, I need to be able, now I can reach up and I can go grab that box out of the shelf.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or I can put my shoe on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Basic stuff, but tangible, and relevant to them. And obviously with athletes and, more performance driven clients, it may be a little bit easier sometimes, if you're working with a golfer, distance. Now with all the other tools they have, you can see velocity and all those other things. Those measurables are important to show them that what they're doing is paying off. So,
and for a golfer, sometimes it's just them being able to play 18 holes.
Yeah, probably the majority of golfers. Well, right? they want to hit it further and they want to be able to play.
They want to be able to play, right?
And hit it as far as possible.
Yeah. And not hate themselves afterwards.
Yeah.
That's the big key thing, because a lot of people will get through the round and then they're just laid up for a couple days afterwards.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you can bring that person to the point where he or she can continue to play golf, I think you're going to have a pretty loyal client right there.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Tony, it was a pleasure having you on, brother. A lot of great information. We're looking forward to the webinar coming up, man.
Yeah, a couple weeks, right?
Yeah, February 18th. We got to pitch that, man. So, yeah, February 18th for all the Nasm people out there. We're looking forward to getting onto that. So, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Yeah, looking forward to having you guys, and looking forward to getting into all things stick mobility, and obviously your guys' background. I think would be super interesting, obviously for our audience, and then the evolution and development of the sticks and the system. Yeah, I'm excited to have you guys on. If there's any interest, I think as part of our partnership, there's a discount for NASM education. Would you guys be cool if I, threw the code out there?
Absolutely.
We could put it in the show notes too. Yeah, this is kind of an exclusive to the Stick Mobility family. It is Stick Mob, STICKMOB 35. So Stick Mob 35. Basically, it's a 35% discount on NASM, CPT, and our specializations, as well as we have a group fitness instructor certification as well that they can purchase using that discount. So it's 35% off, good for most everything on the NASM site. We're getting ready to launch our new CPT 7, which is an update to our flagship personal trainer certification. I think that's launching next week. This will be February 10th. So yeah, the discount, use that promo code at checkout and you should get that 35% off. So exclusive to Stick Mobility fam, Stick Mob 35. Anyway, appreciate you guys, letting me share that. I know that you guys have some discounts too that we'll be highlighting for the NASM audience. So, love to be able to extend the love both ways. So.
Yeah, I would definitely take advantage of that NASM discount. I know. So when I started my personal training career, I went through the NASM, CPT, and also the PES and CS, and it built a really good foundation of the way I look at things now.
That's awesome, man. I'm glad to hear it. And obviously for me too. And you mentioned the CES. I think the CES, we'll probably talk more about this in a couple of weeks when you guys are on, but that specialization, I think there's just so much alignment and synergy with Stick Mobility. It covers a lot of the things that we talked about earlier on in the show today. When you assess somebody's movement, you look for movement tendencies that are less than ideal. Those can be caused by a number of different things, and so then through that CES, you can kind of narrow it down through specific mobility assessments. So you can isolate different movements and see if there's limitations or restrictions that need and would warrant specific programming, that once you address that and improve those limitations in mobility, would allow the collective system to move better. And obviously mobility is more than just improving range of motion. You have to be able to control that range of motion in all three planes, and that's where the sticks to me become invaluable, not only as an assistive prop sometimes when you might need it, but as a resistive tool as well to create tension and really reinforce the control, strength, and stability within those new ranges of motion. So, like I said, I'm stoked to have you guys on in a couple weeks so we can dive deeper into that. But yeah, for Stick Mobility family and listeners, if you already have a personal training credential or strength and conditioning credential, the CES specialization, I think, is one of the best things you can do for any population that you work with. And that system, as I mentioned before, is what we use with our elite athletes, and we use it with our everyday clients. So having that system in place just allows you to apply and scale it and modify it to whoever's in front of you. The programming is one thing, but being able to figure out what to do, that's another. And that's where that systematic approach to kind of identifying what you need to work on is really important. And the CES gives you that. We just launched, the textbook is the second edition, but the course is in its third iteration. The textbook was just published last month. And So the new course, everything's updated using the latest evidence based and evidence informed guidelines. Obviously, evidence based not only includes the research, but there's a clinical application piece and the client component too. So it's taking all of those elements.
Yeah, we'll have you on soon again. We'll chat about some other topics, and we'll look forward to it, brother. Appreciate it, man.
I love it.
Who's your Super Bowl pick?
Oh yeah, before you leave, yeah.
I got to go with the Bucks.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm going with Tom.
You got to go with Tom. You got to dude. The greatness is. How can you say no?
I mean, it's gonna be a tough one.
How can you not root for
the Chiefs are pretty amazing.
Most people would kill to be in 10 playoff games. This son of a bitch is in his 10th Super Bowl. I mean, the guy has won 2 full seasons worth of playoff games. That's just ludicrous.
It is. Yeah, you can't help but root for that. So yeah, that's who I'm pulling for.
Well, I think what will be even crazier is that when somebody surpasses what he's done. I think that'll be just mind-boggling.
Yeah,
I guess if there's a guy, it's the guy that he's playing against.
True,
but think of it, he's got to stay healthy.
Yeah, his receivers.
The supporting cast has to still be there.
Last 20 years.
So many variables. Yeah, that go
so many variables, man. Yeah. I'm like, yeah.
You may hate some of the greats. Yeah,
you may hate Tom Brady, but you got to respect his greatness, man. I'll tell you, it's just incredible to see.
Absolutely. Well, and you look at some of the greats in all the major sports. I mean, there's just that's why there's only a few of them. I mean, there's so many things that factor into being able to do what they've been able to do for so long and at the level that they have. Staying healthy is certainly a big part of it. Support of your teammates, the coaching. I mean, there's just so many things that could cause you to go the other direction.
Right. Big time. Well, awesome. Thanks everyone out there. Thank you for joining us. And until next episode, be good to each other.